highly frustrating because I wanted to understand it and I wanted to be able to talk about how it was similar and different to English and have some translation, but that wasn't the way the program was structured. So I'm excited to talk to you all today and kind of understand your thinking around language learning and language development and how a concept-based inquiry approach can support language learners in building understanding. So, Marie, how has a concept-based approach changed the way that you teach languages?
I think the first time I actually wanted to do concept-based was when I was at the school with an American curriculum. Mm-hmm. And the whole entire, what you just described, learning language by flashcards and like with standards, was just didn't make it all happen. Mm-hmm. So when I looked into Lois Lanning and Lynn Erickson's works, then it started making sense to me that a conceptual approach might be the better option. And so I read up on it and so on and so on. And that's the reason why I signed up for the CBCI Institute in the end, because I wanted to understand how to actually move a curriculum upwards, to actually go into a conceptual understanding and then teach it differently. And what I've seen in terms of what the students understood, what I understood about my own teaching and about their learning made so much more sense when you actually are able to compare and contrast, to do like Venn diagrams, for example, and say, okay, do you do this in English or do you do this in French or do you do this in Spanish and so on. So for me, it was so much more worth it to have them compare, to understand the differences, to be able to vocalize them. And that the students actually after 8 months would remember what they did 8 months ago.
Yes, yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which makes it so much easier to teach, right?
Yes, absolutely.
If we don't have to keep repeating all of that. And so what does that look like in terms of for students? How does that look different for the students in your class?
I think it's less me, more them. That's what I would say. Mm-hmm. So I started stepping back from my PowerPoint presentations. Beautiful, but I mean, a lot of work, first of all. And second, it doesn't allow them to do their thinking. Mm-hmm. So when I step back and I'm just going to be the facilitator, that's what I want them to be. That's what I want them to do. I want them to ask them a question and then I want them to think about the question and see actually how they can verbalize the question, how they can put it down on paper, like how they can design the question and the answer. So it was about them being actually the people that do the work, not me constantly.
Right.
For me, there's a lot of change. But I have narrowed it down. I think there are 4 very detailed change in my approach of teaching. Mm-hmm. The first one is the way how I plan the units. Mm-hmm. So now I just automatically starting to think what are the concepts I need in the 4 strengths, understanding, responding to, critiquing, and producing. And then I starting or always guiding my planning using the generalizations. And that's the first change. The second one is how I select my case studies or the activities materials to be more intentional, more aligned to what I want students to really get out from this activity. I think it's meaningful. I want to make every learning meaningful to students. And then the third one is, I think it's really transitioned my teaching is how the CBCI advised us to ask students to write down their generalization, because in the past we always think after we're teaching these students already understand that, but actually they are not. So this extra step really helps students to go through some deep thinking, and then through this step, they're starting to think the learning and then starting to be ready to transfer. And then last but not least is the way how it suggests us to teach inductively. Mm-hmm. I do inductive teaching, but I think I really like the CBI inquiry cycle. Now I do it with my students and they are very familiar with the process now. It's just this way, it really align well with the IB inquiry base, and then they are empowered, they're very motivated to the language learning. And yeah, I'm happy with I getting into CBCI world and get into this learning and really helped my students and transferred my classroom. And yeah, to be a more concept-based and deep learning thinking classroom.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned case studies and you're more intentional about the case studies that you choose. A question that often comes up when I'm working with language teachers is, what is a case study in language? So what does that mean to you?
It doesn't have to be like a big topic. The case study for my language specific, like Chinese, if I'm teaching them about how the character is structured, the case study can be several characters have the same structure, and then we're trying to compare with another structured character. And I try to, the case study is more like you want to more intentionally choose the one that normally had the same pattern, so students can easily identify the rule in that pattern, so they can apply it to a new context.
And so it can be a character.
Can be a character.
Can be a sentence.
Can be pronunciation. If I'm teaching them how to pronounce this Chinese sound, this tone, we have the tone-known language, like 4 tones. I provide, in group, and then they can compare and make connections. Yeah, so they can compare and they're trying to identify how the first tone really pronounced, how the second tone really goes up and pronounced. Yeah, so it's kind of like it doesn't come in like natural. The teacher have to be carefully selected the case study to really serve well with the generalizations we want students to achieve and to understand.
I think it goes a lot with sentence structure, for example. I think in the languages we teach, it goes a lot like how is a sentence structure and how does it make a difference when you flip it around, for example, right? Like in French with questions, like you get all the 3 different types of questions. All of them mean the same, but all of them serve a different audience, or all of them serve a different purpose, or something along those lines. So when you're really, really clear about, as you said, what you want to achieve in the generalization, it's like, okay, there's like 3 questions. What is the audience of each of the questions, for example? So I think that could be an easy case study for us, for example. What do you think, like in Spanish?
No, I think there are sentences that native speakers will use on a day-to-day basis, but often in language learning we don't teach those expressions. We teach something much more formal, and native speakers will often say, no one actually says that.
Yes.
So it's important for them to see, often the examples in books are very formal, but they're not necessarily a part of natural speech. So it's very important to give them formal texts, informal text conversations, and to talk about those different text types and the different language used in it.
Absolutely.
It's very important to have them to see the difference between the target language and their own language. Most, like in our case, like English, really helpful for them to understand how the language works, how different language formed, or in terms of sentence structures. Yeah, I think agree. Like my students are starting to see the power of generalization when they are starting to see how the Chinese sentences are structured. How they put a subject, a verb, and then object.
What I also find in language teaching is that I see that the students don't necessarily learn a lot of grammar in their first language. Schools have gone away from teaching grammar. They say you're a native speaker, you don't need to learn the grammar. But because they haven't recognized these patterns in learning a second language or a foreign language, they don't know how languages work. So in expressing and getting the children to see what's happening, what are the mechanics of the language, and comparing it with their own language, with their first language, they actually learn the new language, but they also understand their own language, which is also very important.
I was speaking to a friend about that just yesterday, actually. She's learning French, and we were talking about the fact that for each of us, when we started learning another language, we realised that we really had no understanding of our own language, and we're about the same age, we went through school at the same kind of time and in the same part of the world, and we just weren't taught any English grammar at all. So even things like, what does past tense verb mean? We had to kind of go, oh, hang on a minute. I mean, I learned a lot of that as a teacher then, but it was all new, and so it creates all these additional concepts that we have to make sure students have a shared understanding of, and not just assume that they even know what a noun, a verb, and an adjective is.
Yeah, what the function of each of the parts of the sentence is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yuanjia, why are micro-concepts so important in a language class?
Oh, it's really important. Yeah, because, for example, for the IB schools, language, they recommend to have 4 concepts, like for every phase, every year. It's culture, connection, communication, and creativity. So you can't learn the same thing every year. Yeah, so micro-concepts give us a depth in terms of the language and really give students a reason why we are learning this several years. Yeah, give them a different contents. And for example, like we can make an example for if we have a communication, we're starting maybe in first year, they're learning about simple vocabulary and then structures. And then the purpose of them is trying to have a simple communication. And then the concept there is like communication or like speaking. Because like in nature of speaking require people to do a certain thing. But if the micro concept go deeper, then when they are growing a little bit mature in terms of the language development, then they will understand how do they address people differently, depending on different audience. This is what they learn, like a little bit deeper, like deeper understanding of different situations, how they're using different contexts.
Yeah, I think when you say communication is very, very broad, right? Communication can be about anything. It could be a verbal or non-verbal communication, right? You could have, like in a communication, it means, have you chosen the right audience, right? Have you chosen the right text that you wanted to actually, what is your purpose of your communication? Like, is it just going to be a informal catch up with a friend? Is it a text message? Is it, what kind of communication is it exactly? So when you say communication, it means nothing and everything. And when we get those micro concepts in, we know exactly in what direction we want to lead the students. When we say, okay, we're going to go for audience right now. So we're going to be practicing exactly what it is to talk to your teacher, to talk to your principal, to talk to your boss, to talk to your best friends, to talk to your acquaintance, all of those kind of different to talk to many people, because then you have to use a different person, right, in French and Spanish. And like, what is exactly that you want to achieve? So an audience, for example, could be a great way to go into communication, but it's completely different if you say, what's the purpose? It's also communication, but for purpose, we use a completely different approach. So I think what you just said, absolutely right. It's very, very, it's narrowing down to actually something very specific that we need in the language.
Well, and using even more specific concepts like that, like the parts of speech. Each of the parts of speech is a concept in and of itself. And so drilling right down into, if we want students to recognise and express patterns, we have to give them the language to talk about what those patterns are. And that's where our micro-concepts.
And it allows us to recognise the level of the students who are starting at a big concept. And then as we look at different micro concepts, then we're breaking down the language. We're simplifying into small parts, and we take them as far as they can go.
Yeah, absolutely. Rosemary, what do language teachers need to know about concept-based inquiry?
I think the most important thing is that they need to know that it's a good thing. It will help them. It's a positive step. It's something new to learn, but once they've mastered it, they'll see the joy, the understanding in their students. I think that's the biggest thing. But it will take time it's a mind shift, and it's not going to be understood immediately, but it's worthwhile maintaining this approach, and within a reasonable amount of time, they'll see the progress, and they'll see that actually they can work faster. I think very often when we're teaching, we give them 20 examples so that they learn those 20 examples by heart. But if in concept-based teaching, I think if they see 3 case studies and they form generalizations and they understand what they've had access to, they don't need to do it 20 times. They've already understood, so you can move on with the next part of the teaching.
Yeah, I think it takes away the frustration.
For the teacher or the student?
For both. Yeah. Both areas. I think I remember my time before Syria and then my time after Syria. My first time was the most frustrating thing was when you repeat the same thing all over and all over and then again. And then it's like, so it's October and then it's January and then it's May and you're still there. And it's really frustrating. And the times when we started and moving into Syria, CBCI, it was fantastic because all of a sudden, so you said something in October and then they wrote the generalization and then in May we came back and then they were like, oh, this is what happened when we did this, right? And when we said that, I'm like, yes.
Wow.
Yes, I'm there, you did. You have made it and you have done it. So the frustration went away. And I think if anybody that actually has started it and has put a little bit of work in it, if they ever feel this joy that you talked about, and it is amazing, because that's just what you want. You want to be there already. And that's what you get to here.
I think as a language teacher, particularly as a language acquisition teacher who is teaching a language that is not used in the student's daily life, the biggest struggle for the teacher is how to retain the knowledge, the language they have learned. They are not using it in their daily life. It's really easy to forget. And that's why a lot of school is actually noticing why the kids are learning in year 2 and kids learning in year 6 are having the same unit. Like this happened, I have heard a lot of school leaders or parents complaining this, but I think the teachers, from the teacher's perspective, they forgot, the students forget about it. They have to review. But yeah, if we stop and think a little bit why that they are like easy to forget and couldn't retain that knowledge, is because they are lacking of this deep thinking process. And then the language they are learning are not transferable. And there's some processes, missing there. So I have tried in my classroom, like what Maureen just mentioned. With this process of, particularly, I asked them to write down the understanding after every, we have some, lesson engagement. I will have them write down in their inquiry journal and what they have learned. This helped them to get that, deep thinking, and then starting to get transferable.
Oh, that's amazing. I've actually just been learning a lot more about mind-brain education, because there's so many connections with concept-based, and it says exactly what you just described, that if it doesn't make sense and it's not meaningful for students, they will keep it in their working memory for as long as they need it, but they can't transfer it into long-term memory. And if it makes sense and it's meaningful, they can transfer it into long-term memory when they can then access it later. So that forgetting and that reteaching was coming from, I'm holding it in my working memory. And the understanding of working memory now is that we can hold on to things in our working memory for weeks where we thought it was, moments earlier.
And apart from that, it's like they are the one who come up with a generalization. They remembered. It's like, oh, this is the one that I did that work. And then I remembered I read this one down on my book, and then it's like they feel like they earned it, and then they learn it by themselves. So it helped them to
It's that sense of agency that comes with it, and that ownership of the learning.
So they remember because they had that excitement and that fulfilling feeling.
Marie, what's going on around your school context in terms of involving community or other students in the school to support language learning?
Well, right now I've only been the first year in the school, but what usually has helped a lot is to make people understand that there's a very big difference in between language acquisition with immersion. Like, for example, in an English-speaking country, in an English-speaking context, that English will be a little bit different than, for example, in like a vacuum, like teaching in a vacuum, because you teach it for like that many minutes or that many hours in a week. And I think the education around it and the buy-in from parents, from students, from teachers, from administration comes with the understanding of what's what and what's needed for what. Like, there's different purposes in the language education. I also feel like it's really important to hone in on mother tongue, because especially in international education that a lot of us form part of, is mother tongue is something so important, and it's not really explored enough. So what I was often involved in was the Mother Tongue Day, like a Mother Tongue International Day or a Mother Tongue Appreciation Day, and a Mother Tongue program, so that you actually help build up a little bit the idea of that language is diversity, and diversity is important, and diversity helps you open up your mind and helps the community to be better together, basically. So
also identity.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the concepts that we teach or that we explore in a language classroom have to do with the community, because the community builds up on language, because it builds up on communication, understanding of each other. So what the schools are trying, or what we've always tried as language teachers in the schools that I've worked at, was to educate everybody about the idea of the importance of languages.
Across the school.
So the constant message is always that all teachers are language teachers, whatever subject they actually are teaching.
Do you think that translates? Do you think our math teachers and our science teachers and our music teachers see themselves as language teachers?
Initially, no, but I think we've tried to help them with PD sessions and to explain that they need to have specific subject-related vocabulary. You know, I think if you just say you're a language teacher, then nothing will happen.
Exactly.
But if you break it into steps and
strategy,
like specific vocabulary will help, pictures will help, and then also explaining that sometimes the children actually understand what's happening, but they can't verbalize themselves. And that if you give them the vocab, or if you don't ask them to write it, but if you allow them to say it, they might be more successful.
Or write it in another language.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and joining in this conversation. I look forward to kind of seeing how the future of concept-based language continues to develop. Hopefully, you find opportunities to collaborate yourself and continue to provide additional resources for language teachers who are looking for examples of what this can look like in their classrooms. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yes.